The Bright Continent. African Art History. Kathy Kurnow. Cleveland State University. 2018. The Bright Continent, African Art History by Kathy Kurnow is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 4.0 international license, except where otherwise noted. Contents. Introduction. Acknowledgements. Dedication. Chapter 1, Orientation to Africa and its Art. Chapter 1.1, General Introduction. Chapter 1.2, Gender, Materials, Techniques in Traditional Art. Chapter 1.3, Training and Patronage in Traditional Art. Chapter 1.4, Gender, Materials, Techniques in Contemporary Art. Chapter 1.5, Training and Patronage in Contemporary Art. Chapter 1.6, Elements of Style and Design. Introduction. We come to art from various locations. Some are out for a stroll, stumbling upon objects that grab their attention. Others are equipped with guidebooks, methodically approaching and regularly revisiting both actual and virtual works. Still other viewers revel in the familiar, remaining attentive to the details and information that cement lifelong friendships. African art is no different. For some, it may initially hold few clues that help unpack its meaning. Those viewers may have little knowledge of Africa or could actually be African and edge from a different part of the continent, a totally different culture, or members of a religion that distances them even from a work their own hometown produced. No art is completely transparent, letting us understand all of an artist's constraints, thoughts, choices, or associations. But if we are not privy to all of an artist's perceptions and interpretations, we can lessen the differences in our understanding and edge, and this is a process that creates human pleasure in both cerebral and sensual ways. By familiarizing ourselves with art, learning its visual vocabulary and grammar, assessing our taste for it, and placing it within the contexts of its makers and users, we expand our world. You don't have to like every work you see, even when someone labels it a masterpiece. You may develop a love for a piece made for tourists or one that seems flawed. That's fine. The goal for anyone studying art is to develop knowledge and refine your own taste. Art is a window that permits vision within and without, and as such, it allows you to become a seer whose perceptions and comprehension lead to revelations. This book aims to act as your map through the world of African art. As such, it will help you define the competencies you need to develop and edge visual analysis, research, noting what information is critical, asking questions, and writing down your observations and edge, and provide opportunities for you to practice these skills until you are proficient. It will also expose you to new art forms and the worlds that produced them, enriching your understanding and appreciation. This is an ongoing project. Your text will not be complete the day you first click on it, but will be written as we proceed through the course. Because it will be used for other courses beyond your own, you may find that it includes materials beyond those your class demands. Encourage your curiosity and edge chase after it. Guardian figure. Mambula, male artist, Nigeria, late 19th or early 20th century. Wood and pigment, 8.5 x 3.75 x 3 inches. Brooklyn Museum, 73.9.1 SL3. Gift of Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Jarevsky. Creative Commons by. Acknowledgements. I've enjoyed textbook-related conversations since those far-off days when African art history had no dedicated textbooks. I was a member of the textbook committee inaugurated by the Arts Council of the African Studies Association, and thankful I was part of the planning group rather than a designated author. Many thanks to Monica Blackman-Visoma, who edited the History of Art in Africa and wrote much of its text, as well as her team of fellow writers, composed of Robin Pointer and Herbert M. Cole. Their efforts to cover the entire continent from the earliest times to the present was a daunting task that they accomplished with grace. A second text, Visual Arts of Africa by Judith Perrine and Fred T. Smith, was more selective in its coverage, and its less encyclopedic organization emphasized gender and its relationship to the arts, a very useful approach. My appreciation extends to these authors as well. Unfortunately, publishing costs have risen. Full-page photos, multiple-angle shots, full-color pictures, and comparative images have become prohibitive. While both former texts are useful, neither is a perfect fit for the way I teach. For the past 10 years, I've experimented with different approaches to teaching, and I would like to thank my students from my Rewriting the Textbook seminar in spring 2012 for their creative suggestions and conversations about what an ideal textbook would include. While not all of their ideas can be implemented, we concurred that an interactive textbook is ideal, and this is the result. Without an institutional shift towards museums and archives allowing Creative Commons usage of their images, as well as the personal generosity of many individual photographers, a book of this type would not be possible. I would particularly like to express appreciation to the British Museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Brooklyn Museum, the Yale Art Gallery, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Turpin Museum, the National Archives, UK, the Detroit Institute of Art, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Dallas Museum of Art, Art Store and many other individuals and institutions for making their collections available for non-commercial use. Finally, my appreciation is extended to the Cleveland State team that helped me prepare and disseminate this book. Our library director Glenda A. Thornton, Heather Capret, Justin Grogan Myers, Marcia A. Miles, Barbara Loomis, Christopher E. Renison, and Barbara Gauthier. Dedication. To my friends and colleagues from the Roy Sieber Patrick McNaughton African Art History lineage, especially Diane Pellering, Barbara Frank, Christine Mullen Creamer, Mary Jo Arnoldi, Bill Dewey, and Janet Purdy. May our family tree of teaching continue to grow and flourish. Chapter 1, Orientation to Africa and its Art. Chapter 1.1, General Introduction. Learning Objectives. Identify Africa's geographic zones and major art-producing countries. Differentiate the traditional and contemporary arts of Africa by gender, material, function, training, and patronage. Identify key elements of design in two- and three-dimensional works. Analyze the stylistic traits of single and comparative artworks using art historical vocabulary. Record key information about the context of an artwork. Memorize the ethnic group/artist, name, country, and century that identify an artwork. Africa. That's a term that creates a neat box, limited by geographic boundaries. But what attributes does this continent's name conjure? Your personal experience and exposure define your mental pictures of Africa. If you were raised there, your image is unlikely to be continent-wide. You picture the mango tree outside your house, your father and his friends sitting on mats and talking. Your mind is filled with images of city traffic and the cries of hawkers selling soft drinks, newspapers, tissues, plantain chips, peanuts. You're transported to a boarding school, as you press your uniform, hurrying to line up, before the prefect discovers you're late. If you aren't African, and you've never traveled there, these particular scenes are unlikely to fill your mind. Your thoughts and positive or negative and are shaped by media, your education, and your imagination. Despite American attempts to make K-12 education broader through multiculturalism, most elementary and high school teachers have studied little about Africa, and are as subject as their students to visual and cultural stereotypes. Why is it so easy to stereotype a whole continent? Partly, because our sense of geography is weak. No American and even those who have never traveled and would assume that Icelandic and Greek cultures are identical or even substantially similar. Yet in familiarity with African countries and ethnonyms, histories, and cultural distinctions often groups anything from the continent with an adjective no more specific than African. Figure 1. Africa and Europe from space. NASA, 2015, public domain. A quick look at a photo taken in space demonstrates just how small Europe is in comparison to Africa. Figure 1. Print maps have distorted the size relationships of land masses for centuries in order to conveniently show longitude and latitude. A comparative map further indicates just how vast Africa is. Figure 2. If we can recognize just how different Iceland and Greece are, then why are we so eager to believe that African cultures are similar, or assume that the continent shares a common religion, history, or arts? Figure 2. Kai Krause's The True Size of Africa. Media imagery has created a picture of Africa that is often out of date, exaggerated, or that magnifies issues of one area, as if they apply to the continent. Often perspectives deny complexity or are ahistorical, as if Africa has remained unchanged for centuries or longer. Exercises.
El Tour, Starving Girl, late 1960s, Dr. Lyle Conrad, Public Domain, Soldiers, Central African Rep, 2007, Martin H.C.C. MISA 2.0 House, Public Domain, Smiling Girl, Public Domain, Jasper Beck's Portrait of Miguel de Castro, 1643, Artster, Bishop Samuel A.J. Crowther and Son, 1870, Public Domain, Luanda, Angola, 2013, Fabio Vannin C.C. MISA 3.0 Refugee Camp Horn of Africa, 2011. Oxfam CC 3.0 Models, Uganda, 2014. Iguanacla CC MISA 4.0 Our Lady of Peace, Yamoussoukro, Côte d'Ivoire, 2013. Jbadane CC My North Carolina 2.0 Morocco, Nigeria, 2010. Heinrich Boll Stiftung CC MISA 2.0 Giraffe, 2005. Miroslav Duchesek CC MISA 3.0 Maasai Warriors, 1921. Public Domain, Nkrumah Mausoleum, Accra, Ghana, Public Domain. Point. Look at the images here. Which ones do you find unexpected? The higher the number, the more likely you have media-limited preconceptions about Africa. Archaeology and physical anthropology show us human life originated in East Africa, yet our depth of knowledge relating to the earliest African history is limited either to those regions that had early writing systems, Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, or to those that have hosted extensive archaeological research. Oral history supplies considerable information, but gaps remain. The dispersal of language families also supplies clues relating to population movements. Many parts of Africa were in direct or indirect contact with Europe and Asia. Egypt and some other parts of North Africa were incorporated into the Roman Empire and afterwards continued to trade with the Mediterranean world. By the 8th century, Arab-speaking chroniclers recorded information about parts of eastern, northern and western Africa. Ethiopians traveled to Byzantium and the Middle East, as well as India, and Persians and Arabs traded with a number of East African coastal communities, as did the Chinese. The 15th century saw the beginning of European direct contact with West, then Central, then South and East Africa, as well as travelers' accounts and documents written by Africans in European languages or Arabic. The Damenghanitu, or composite map of the Ming Empire, is the oldest surviving map that shows Africa. Although depicted from an ethnocentric viewpoint, China dwarfs every other known landmass. It demonstrates early Chinese awareness of the continent and even, albeit enlarged, one of its interior lakes, possibly Lake Victoria. Painted on silk, the map is huge, at approximately 12.67 x 6.67 feet. It appears to be a copy of a map from 1389. Wikimedia Commons. Public Domain. Because Europeans were confined primarily to coastal regions, their information about the West and Central African interiors was usually second-hand and often inaccurate. Access restriction until the 19th century prevented them from reaching the hinterland, where they could obtain the raw materials they sought: gold, ivory, furs, pepper, and human beings. Coastal merchants, who acted as middlemen, profited from their control of trade. Europeans could not wrest it from them, because they were few in number, arrived on floating targets, and were equipped with volatile gunpowder and inaccurate firearms whose reloading time was no match for a well-aimed arrow. In the 19th century, however, all that changed. The repeating rifle shifted the military advantage, and, as the century wore on, the Maxim-mounted machine gun provided even more effective firepower. Two additional shifts earlier in the century provided the military with advance intelligence, missionary and commercial penetration of the interior. Missionaries forged diplomatic alliances, took note of local power structures, and learned new languages. Commercial concerns such as the Royal Niger Company did the same. While some European powers had gained an earlier foothold in Africa and edged the Portuguese in Angola and Mozambique, the Dutch at the Cape of Good Hope, the French at St. Louis along the Senegal River, and the turnover of Portuguese, Dutch, Danish, English occupants of coastal Ghanaian forts and edge the late 19th century produced European determination to carve up the continent into defined spheres of influence. The Berlin Conference of 1884–85 established European borders for French, English, Belgian, German, Portuguese, Italian, and Spanish interests that soon became colonies. Map of colonial Africa as in 1913, with modern borders.
Eric Gaba, Creative Commons CC BY-SA 3.0. Colonialism did not actually last long. Most African nations became independent by 1960/61. In some respects, its impact was negligible. In others, it had major political and cultural effects. When Europeans took control, they found a continent with varied political systems. Some areas were empires or kingdoms, run by a single ruler and his counselors. Other areas were more egalitarian city-states, run by all adult men or by a gerontocracy. Some ethnic groups operated as single polities, while others comprised multiple states that warred with one another. The arbitrary nature of the Berlin Conference's borders meant that old states or families might be split into two spheres. It also meant that former rulers might continue as cultural leaders, if cooperative, or be dethroned or exiled, if resistant. Even those who kept their positions no longer had military or full legal authority, nor did they have the ability to collect taxes. Governments based on the home country's will were established, and independence did not reinstate traditional rulers to the full powers they had held previously. Besides new political and court systems, foreign religious and educational systems had major lasting influences. Christianity arrived in Egypt, the Sudan, and Ethiopia in the 4th century, the same period it was recognized officially in Europe, and parts of northern and eastern Africa became Muslim immediately after the Prophet Muhammad's death. Islam continued to spread into West Africa slowly via North African trade, but Christian missionization exploded in the 19th century, and since the 1970s both faiths have pushed many older religions aside. Advancement in the civil service whether colonial or independence era requires mastery of a foreign language that is usually the language of instruction in schools. Curricula are based on European models and extend to university level, which means they vary considerably depending on the former colonial power. Access to international media and more accessible travel or migration have had their own impact. Foreign films, music videos, and clothing jostle with local products. While none of these features means that African culture has been abandoned, it does signify that values have been adjusted, and cultures often compete for supremacy, some winning because of their status as imported novelties. As we'll see, the visual arts are part of this duality, with retentions of older practices coexisting with new materials, functions, training, and patrons. There are many different ways of breaking this huge continent into smaller segments for effective discussion. We could look at climate zones, desert, Sahel, savanna, rainforest. We could consider colonial history and examine Anglophone, Francophone, or Lusophone nations. We are going to take an approach that considers a limited number of geographic zones, dividing the continent into 7 sectors. These often include areas that were once part of a large kingdom or kingdoms, or had linked trading patterns, or share certain cultural, linguistic, or historic features but they are somewhat arbitrary just the same. They are, as follows: North Africa, Western Sudan, Upper Guinea Coast, Lower Guinea Coast, Central Africa, Southern Africa, East Africa. North Africa, Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, Western Sahara. These countries have had long relationships with Europe, the Middle East, and countries south of the Saharan Desert. The early spread of Islam limited figurative arts, which are forbidden by religion. The Western Sudan, Mauritania, Senegal, Gambia, Mali, Burkina Faso, southern parts of Algeria and Libya, northern parts of Liberia, Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, Togo, Benin Republic, Nigeria, and Cameroon, Chad, Central African Republic. Although this is a huge area, some regions are desert and have very small populations. It has been home to some of the largest African empires, because the geography allowed the use of horses. Much of the region has been Muslim for 500 to 1,200 years, which limited figurative art, since it is banned by Islam. Upper Guinea Coast, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Southern Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana. This region was once fairly heavily forested, and, along with the Lower Guinea Coast and the Western Sudan, constitutes what is usually called West Africa. Some of the ethnic groups create and use masks and figures, while others have neither artistic tradition. Lower Guinea Coast, Southern Togo, Benin Republic, and Nigeria. Although this region does not appear to be physically large, it includes the densest populations in Africa, and is one of 2 key sculpture-producing regions. Central Africa, southeastern Nigeria, southern Cameroon, Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, Republic of Congo or Congo-Brazzaville, after its capital, Democratic Republic of Congo also called DRC or Congo-Kinshasa, Angola. This region is the second largest producer of sculpture in the continent. Southern Africa, Namibia, Botswana, Zambia, South Africa, Lesotho, Swaziland, Zimbabwe, Malawi. While this region's contemporary art scene is active, older art forms are mostly confined to dress and body decoration. Masquerades occur in parts of Zambia and in Malawi, but not elsewhere. East Africa, Madagascar, Mozambique, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Kenya, Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, Ethiopia, Djibouti, Eritrea. The art forms of this region are very diverse, but masquerades do not exist outside of a section of Mozambique, and figurative sculpture is also limited. Household arts, dress and body arts, and architecture are stressed, though Madagascar and Ethiopia have extensive textile traditions, and the latter also has a many centuries-old painting tradition. Contemporary Africa consists of 54 countries, some of which are island nations: Cape Verde Islands, Comoros, Mauritius, Seychelles, Sao Tome and Principe. Nations, however, are not synonymous with cultures. Very few countries consist of a homogeneous people. Rather, countries are made up of ethnic groups. Some nations are occupied by a handful, while others include over 300. These groups are only occasionally isolated. Often a given town or city includes multiple ethnic groups in large numbers. At other times, a small cluster of one ethnic group's members live as a minority within the territory of another. Members marry one another, but self-identification is usually dependent on the culture's inheritance system. In a patrilineal society, where inheritance is through the male line I.e., from father to son, a child carries the ethnicity of its father. In a matrilineal society, where inheritance is through the female line I.e., from a man to his sister's son, a child carries his mother's ethnicity. What about tribe? While many Africans use the word tribe to describe their ethnicity, it is a term that carries different meanings for Americans and should be avoided, because those associations are misleading. We tend to link the word tribe either with nomadic prehistoric people or with Native Americans, and in each case it has picked up connotations of small bands of people who live either on the move or reside in small villages. In the United States, we don't use the word to discuss large populations or people who live in cities, and therefore it can distort ideas of what Africa is like, and perpetuate inaccurate preconceptions. If we don't think of the Irish 4.8 million or the South Koreans 51.25 million as tribes, even though both nations have fairly homogeneous populations, why would we describe the Yoruba or the Hausa both in the 38 to 40 million range as tribes? Ethnic group accurately describes both the Zulu and the Han Chinese, despite differences in numbers and lifestyle. The colors represent language families comparable to Romance languages, Germanic languages, Dravidian languages, Sino-Tibetan languages. Members of such families have a common historical origin. The chart and the map itself mention some of the ethnic groups belonging to each language family, but there are far more ethnic groups that do not appear here. Wikimedia Commons, United States. Central Intelligence Agency, 1996. Public domain. How much history does African art have? As we'll see, African art is full of variety. We are going to examine art from many different parts of the continent with varied functions, appearances, and meaning. Outside of North Africa and parts of the Sudan and Ethiopia, our knowledge of African art is severely limited historically. Most older works in museums are from the 19th and 20th century, because wood has been a primary medium for sculpture. Unfortunately, both termites and acidic soil do not allow its long survival, even when objects are wrapped in insect repellent leaves or stored in the rafters where the smoke from cooking fires helps slow insect depredations. Art is not valued for age, but rather for vitality, and a termite-ridden work will be replaced. Some mediums are more resistant, the copper-based alloys brass copper plus zinc and bronze copper plus tin will survive burial in damp soil, although oxidation may produce a greenish surface patina. Terracotta-fired clay may break, but it will not deteriorate. Ivory will survive above ground, but it can burn in fires like wood and will deteriorate if buried. Very little archaeological work has been conducted south of the Sahara, but when it has occurred, its style and direction often include startling deviations from what 19th and 20th century art suggest. There are huge gaps in African art history due to these factors. The Edo people of Nigeria's Benin Kingdom are the only ethnic group to have substantial metal and ivory works from an unbroken period of just over 500 years. This permits gauging stylistic change, the introduction of new motifs and forms, and other aspects that are commonly assessed in art worldwide. Despite the spottiness of our general knowledge of African art history, however, we do know that art on the continent began by at least 10,000 BC long before the Egyptian pyramids and continues until today. With the exception of the ancient Sahara and the impact of trade relationships across the desert, we will not be looking at the art of North Africa. While it is certainly a part of Africa, the history and art history of Egypt alone cover so many centuries that it would limit what we could examine in the rest of the continent. Likewise, a survey of this type cannot give equal attention to the arts of all parts of Africa. Even from the relatively little we know about African art in the distant past, we can see that substantial change has occurred in over time. So what constitutes traditional African art, if change is consistent? Like many terms, it is imperfect, especially when contrasted with contemporary African art. The two words suggest division by time, but both artistic directions can coexist. Traditional African art is a response, whether it changes or not, to older patterns of function, such as traditional African religions, or used by traditional governmental institutions in palaces, or forms of protective and/or divinatory equipment. Traditional training is via formal or informal apprenticeship or self-education. Traditional patrons are individuals, male or female societies, priests, aristocrats or rulers. Contemporary African art is distinguished by its diversions from the root of traditional art. The emphasis of its functions differs, emphasizing status display or advertising. Training can be by apprenticeship at some levels, such as sign painting, and can also result from self-education, but it often involves formalized training via a Western model, organized workshops, art school, or university specialization. Materials could be identical to those used by traditional artists, but technologies expand to incorporate acrylic or oil paint, glass, cement, resin, rubber, or other mediums that became available through foreign introduction. Contemporary patrons are usually individuals or corporate bodies and companies, hotels, government buildings and need not be African at all. In a way, art made for export to tourists or overseas shops is contemporary art, because, even if the artists are the same ones who make traditional art for local use, the shift to indirect patronage and accommodation to foreign preferences moves them toward the contemporary end of the spectrum. In this chapter, we'll look more carefully at both traditional and contemporary African art, examining their mediums, tools, training methods, patrons, and audiences. We'll also examine issues of style, which apply to both types of art. Chapter 1.2, Gender, Materials, Techniques in Traditional Art. The Path with Roots, Traditional African Art. Traditional African art restricts the use of certain materials to a specific gender and age in most cases. Because it's a huge continent, many aspects aren't absolute, but apply to most cultures outside of North Africa. An examination of materials and techniques will elucidate the least and most flexible aspects of artists and fixed gender. Carving, wood, ivory, stone. This lidded wooden vessel is whitened in areas by chalk kaolin clay, while the light blue is a mixture of chalk and imported laundry bluing. Yoruba male artist, Dahomey Kingdom, Republic of Benin, 19th century. H 13.19, XW 16.93, XD 7.48. Ethnologists Museum Africa, 3rd C 6294, B. Copyright photo, Ethnologists Museum der Staatlichen Museen zu Berlin and Pro Capital Sharp SI Kulturbesitz, Photograph /in, Hans Joachim Radesubov. Creative Commons CC by North Carolina SA 3.0 Delaware. Carving is a sculptural approach. Artists remove material when they carve. Worldwide, the most common carving materials have been wood, stone, and ivory. South of the Sahara, stone is the least common of the three, but its stone carving does occur in a few regions. Because of its rarity, its use is worth noting. It has the most durability and longevity of the three materials. Ivory is a luxury material. Although it was readily available in many parts of Africa, its use was usually restricted to rulers, aristocrats, or those recognized for special achievement. Wood was the most common carving material, although it became rarer in arid regions. Men exclusively carve wood, ivory, bone, and stone, all subtractive substances that require sections to be removed in order to create the desired form. They usually are also responsible for cutting down the tree that yields their material, usually with a prayer or small sacrifice to honor the spirit housed within. This Samo blacksmith from Burkina Faso is using an adze to shape another tool handle. Photo, Dr. Johann Theodorus Broekhuijs, 1970-71. Tropen Museum. Creative Commons CC by SA 3.0. This basalt figure is one of about 300 similar stone sculptures found in a small part of Ejigam territory in southeastern Nigeria. They date somewhere between the 16th and 19th century. 22.44. Copyright Trustees of the British Museum. Creative Commons CC by North Carolina SA 4.0. Sometimes the chosen wood is mandated by the type of object. In general, lightweight woods are used for masquerades to lessen the dancer's burden, while artists select denser, weightier specimens for figures meant to be termite resistant. The traditional artist's toolkit formerly consisted of a set of differently sized adzes and knives for finishing work. The adze chops into the wood and towards the artist, a motion not unlike that of the African farm hoe, whose shape it mimics. Artists work directly into the wood without preliminary drawings, blocking out the basic forms, then refining them. In nearly all cases, objects made from wood are monoxyl, that is made from a single block of wood, rather than joined by glue, pegs, or nails. In areas with traditions of carving ivory and or stone, woodworkers remain the sculptors and continue to use the adze. Soapstone is quite soft and is usually the material of choice, but quartz, granite, and other stones have also served in some regions. Wooden sculptures are frequently. This small figure began as a white hippo tooth, but the owner rubbed it with orange red palm oil. Over time, the figure developed a shiny patina from handling, as well as its orangish color and worn-down features. Figure of Saint Anthony by a male Congo artist, Angola, 18th century. 3/8. X diam 1 3/16. 11.1 x 3 cm hippo incisor tooth. Metropolitan Museum of Art, 1999.295.6. Gift of Ernst Enspach. Public domain. Painted. While traditional artists often employ manufactured paints today, colors made from botanical and mineral sources were standard in centuries past. Even when the wooden surface remains unpainted, handling and the application of oil and pigment may change the surface color. This also can occur with ivories. This result from handling isn't produced by the artist, but by the owner, and is intentional. It is known as a patina, and can also develop from sacrificial materials poured on the artwork. Neither worn paint nor insect damage constitutes a patina. This wooden female figure bears a fixed sacrificial patina, its crusty surface the result of multiple applications of millet gruel and blood. Dogon male artist, Mali, 19th century or earlier. H 13. XW3. XD25/8. Metropolitan Museum of Art, 1977.394.21. Gift of Lester Wonderman. Public domain. Scientists can approximate the age of both wood and ivory through the carbon-14 dating or radiocarbon dating technique. This testing can only be used on substances that were once alive: bone, charcoal, wood, ivory, textiles made from cotton, wool, linen, silk, etc. The method checks the decay rate of carbon-14, a radioisotope, to determine age. While fairly effective for dating items from the distant past, it cannot easily distinguish an object made in 1700 from one carved in 1850. The plus or minus accuracy diminishes as one approaches the present. One exception, however, occurs. Items whose carbon-bearing material was alive after 20th century nuclear testing and the explosion of fossil fuel use show a different profile, so these recent items have artificially higher radiocarbon levels. Stone objects, being inorganic, cannot be tested with radiocarbon dating, nor any other scientific method to date, although the age of the rock itself can be geologically determined. Why is carving restricted to men? Most artists don't articulate the reasons, attributing this to custom from time immemorial. However, the practice seems to stem from dual beliefs. Women may become infertile if they work with objects used in sacred contexts, and their bodies during menstruation have the power to neutralize the supernatural medicines that often activate masks or figures. Metalworking. Multiple abstract birds ornament this forged iron staff. Yoruba male artist, Nigeria, 19th to early 20th century. 20. x 7.5. x 8. Yale University Art Gallery, 1995.81.1. Gift of Drs. Ruth and Theodore Lids. Public domain. Point metal arts are also restricted to male artists. Some artworks are forged, that is, metal is heated and then hammered into a given shape. Iron is most often treated in this way, and the method itself limits the complexity of shapes produced. Works created this way are usually simplified. Thin sheet metal, such as brass or copper, can be decorated by pressing designs into the surface chasing, creating dots on the surface, stippling or hammering designs outward from the back to create a relief repousse. These methods. Cola container. New male artist, Nigeria, late 19th/early 20th century. Ethnologists Museum Africa, 3rd c. 27818, b. Copyright photo, Ethnologists Museum der Staatlichen Museen zu Berlin and Pro Capital Sharp SI-Kulturbesitz Photograph/in, Volker link, Photograph/in, Volker link. Creative Commons CC by North Carolina SA 3.0 Delaware. Create an embossed effect. The use of molten metal poured into molds can produce more complex results. Some molds can be reused, resulting in solid metal objects such as coins. Since a solid metal form and a hollow one look identical, a desire to conserve valuable Axum coin made from a reusable mold, Ethiopia, 4th century. One of two coins depicting Asinus and an anonymous king. Silver with gilt. Walters Art Museum, 59.794. Gift of Joseph and Margaret Knopfmacher. Creative Commons CC by SA 3.0. Metals led to a one-use mold technique meant to produce hollow sculpture, the lost wax casting technique, also known as cire perdue.
This lost wax casting diagram using a 15th century Yoruba bronze head from Ife, Nigeria, as an example shows the steps of this technique from left to right. 1 roughly shaped clay head, 2 beeswax applied and details created in wax, 3 wax sprues and vents attached to surface, 4 fine clay and regular clay packed around head, sprues and vents extending to surface, 5 head heated, wax runs out, 6 molten metal poured, fills in gaps left by wax, 7 outer terracotta shell broken off, 8 sprues and vents filed down, finishing work complete. Copyright Trustees of the British Museum. Creative Commons CC by North Carolina SA 4.0. To produce such a casting, the artist begins with a lump of clay, shaped loosely like the desired result. The artist covers that core with a thin layer of malleable beeswax and works details into the wax with a tool. Sometimes the wax is rolled between the palm to form wax threads, which can then be coiled or hatched, producing a raised texture. Sprues and vents are then attached to the wax. Both are wax cylinders. The sprue will eventually become the channel where liquefied metal enters the mold, while the vent provides an exit for any gases. The artist then applies a fine, semi-liquid layer of clay to the wax surface, making sure it fills all crevices. He then packs clay around the object, including all but the ends of the sprues and vents. This outer pack of clay is called the investment, and it is allowed to air dry. At this point, the object looks like a dry clay lump. Placed in a fire, it is positioned so that the liquefying wax will run out. The wax itself is what is lost in the process, although the artist usually collects the liquid runoff for reuse. The lump now has the following 3 layers: the clay core, a gap where the wax once was including empty channels where the sprues and vents were, and the outer investment. Metal has been heated in a crucible and is poured into the sprue channels, until all empty spaces are filled. The metal is left to cool, and the outer clay mold is cracked off. The sculptor then files down the metal sprue projections and cleans the surface. He may choose to remove the clay core or leave it in place. This bronze staff top in the form of a double-headed snake was made using the lost wax casting method. Igbo male artist, Igbo Ukwu site, Nigeria, 9th-10th century. National Museum, Lagos, Nigeria. Achawar, Wikimedia Commons, color correction. Creative Commons CC by SA 3.0.
For most of Africa before the 20th century, brass and bronze both copper-based or cuprous alloys were the most valuable metals, for these alloys depended on imported or long-distance trade components. Copper itself does not flow readily, so sculptors usually add other metals to form alloys for smoother castings. Copper plus tin makes bronze, while copper plus zinc makes brass. Gold was exploited in Senegal and what is now Ghana, as well as in parts of southern Africa, and can also be cast through Sire Purdue. Relatively little silver occurs in Africa. Its use in art typically derives from imported metal, particularly the European Maria Theresa thalers, first minted in the 18th century. These silver armlets with gold ornaments belonged to the last monarch of the Dahomey kingdom, Bihanzin, a male member of the Houtangi family, who constituted the Royal Guild for Arts, produced them from melted down foreign coins. Thon male artist, Dahomey Kingdom, Republic of Benin, late 19th century. 7.5. Long. Ethnologists Museum Africa, 3rd c. 5548 b. Copyright photo, Ethnologists Museum der Staatlichen Museen zu Berlin and Pro Capital Sharp SI Kulturbesitz. Photograph /in, Hendrik Ortlieb. Creative Commons CC by North Carolina SA 3.0 Delaware. Metal itself cannot be scientifically dated, but if the clay core remains in a sculpture, that core's firing date can be determined through thermoluminescence or TL dating. This procedure ascertains when certain materials such as clay were heated, measuring the object's radiation since firing. It permits more dating accuracy than carbon dating. Terracotta sculpture and pottery. This Sigbata potter from Cameroon has added a coil of clay to the top of the pot, then flattened and smoothed it into the existing clay. Copyright the Trustees of the British Museum, FCB 63.10. Creative Commons CC by North Carolina SA 4.0. When the clay is leather hard, the potter uses a variety of tools to incise lines and dots. The pot has darkened by being in a smoky environment. The artist also added ridges and relief elements at this time. Detail of a pot made by a Nupe woman, Nigeria, 20th century. Cleveland State University African Art Collection. This ritual pot made by the Igbo potter Onaji shows greater elaboration than domestic ware, as well as figurative elements. Igbo, Nigeria, probably 1970s. Copyright the Trustees of the British Museum, 2015, 2010.7. Creative Commons CC by North Carolina SA 4.0. Working with clay is an additive approach to sculpture, since forms are built by adding more and more clay and modeling the form with tools. Modeling is a more forgiving art, because corrections can occur until the material hardens. Although unbaked clay can be molded into a variety of forms, heavy rain will turn an unprotected figure back to soil. In order for clay pots or sculpture to become permanent, they must be fired or baked. In Africa, this means they are placed in an outdoor pen after sun drying, usually with a group of similar pieces. Light brush is positioned around the works, then firewood is stacked over the whole and set alight, burning throughout the night. After firing, works are referred to as terracotta pots or sculptures. They retain their earthen color, but this can be altered by swishing them in a variety of hot liquids impregnated with bark or other vegetable matter, or by coating them with white kaolin clay or paint. After firing, a piece may break, but it is permanently fixed. In almost all of Africa, women are the potters. Often this is not just a personal enterprise, but a group endeavor in villages that specialize in this art form. People use domestic containers for water, cooking, and storage, as well as incense burners, pipes, and other objects. Although imported goods and local plastics have intruded on their sales, potters still have a healthy market. Some terracottas are meant for shrine use, and these frequently have more elaborate and sometimes figurative decoration. A few cultures are exceptions to the female potter rule. Hausa men make pots, and there are both male and female potters among the Congo, Dogon, Mossi, Cameroon grasslands. This terracotta memorial head represents an Akan royal and was made by a female artist from the Twifohemen region of Ghana's Asante Empire, circa 1800. H8.5. XW6. Metropolitan Museum of Art, 2015.790. Gift of Evelyn Cranes Cossack, The Kronos Collections. Public domain. Terracotta sculpture can be made by men or women, depending on the area. Akan women, for example, are known to have created terracotta figures, while Ado men made terracotta heads in the Benin Kingdom. While we cannot be sure which gender made the Nok terracottas from Nigeria, the oldest extant sculpture south of the Sahara, or the much later Bira terracotta figures and heads from Niger, it seems likely that men made terracotta sculptures in those cultures with brisk casters, since they first model in clay and wax before casting their forms. This 11th-15th century terracotta head from Ife, Nigeria, was probably made by a Yoruba male artist who was also a brisk caster. Ethnologists Museum Africa, 3rd c. 27526. Copyright photo, Ethnologists Museum der Staatlichen Museen zu Berlin and Pro Capital Sharp SI Kulturbesitz. Creative Commons CC by North Carolina SA 3.0 Delaware. Whether pots or figures, objects made from clay have to dry thoroughly before firing, since any moisture trapped within will expand and cause the object to explode. For this reason, larger clay figures have to be hollow in order to maximize drying. Traditional African pottery is fired in the open at relatively low temperatures, not in a kiln. In sub-Saharan Africa, and like Asia or the West, the pottery wheel is not used, nor are glazes applied. Thermoluminescent or TL dating dates terracotta, just as it does the fired clay core that remains in some metal castings. Architecture. Ethiopia is one of the few sub-Saharan countries with stone suitable for building. Emperor Fasilides Castle at Gondar, Ethiopia. 17th century. Creative Commons CC by 2.0. Zulu families used to live in fiber houses spaced in a circular arrangement, their cattle kept in the middle. Women built the structures, binding fibers and grass over a reed support. South Africa, early 20th century. Public domain. Traditional African architecture is extremely varied in material, shape, and decoration. Permanent materials like stone are rarely used. Sun-dried clay bricks or fiber were the most typical construction mediums. Men are typically the builders, except for nomadic and semi-nomadic peoples, where women are responsible for rapid construction. The gender of those who paint the walls or model relief decoration varies according to a region. Sun-dried brick plastered with mud allows near total construction freedom. Round or rectangular buildings, built-in furniture, wall niches, screening elements and edge all are possible. Thick walls help keep heat out despite the intense sun, and thatch directs rain away from the walls. Maintenance is required, however. If abandoned, the eco-friendly structures will break down. Table Compound in northern Ghana, 2009. Rita Willert, Creative Commons CC by North Carolina 2.0. Free and available, clay can create sculptural structures the same color as the surrounding earth, integrating buildings into their environment in an organic way. Roofing depends on geography. Areas with heavy rainfall have steeply pitched thatch roofs, while those in arid zones can be flat roofed. A street in the town of Jen in Mali, where masons construct the buildings, 1972. Photo by Gilles Merritt. Creative Commons CC by SA 3.0. In most parts of the sub-Saharan continent, specialized architects were necessary. Every member of the appropriate gender knew how to build, and families and neighbors cooperated. In those regions dry enough to allow two-story buildings, such as northern Mali or the Hausa regions of Nigeria and Niger, specialized masons developed, since engineering knowledge was needed. Debel women from South Africa use brilliant paint to create designs on their homes. Through the first half of the 20th century, they used various earth tones to do so. 1983, UN Photo/P. Creative Commons CC by North Carolina North Dakota 2.0. Elaborate surface decoration might take the form of mud relief or paint. Natural pigments are still used in many areas, while bright commercial colors have replaced them elsewhere. Families usually live collectively in compounds, houses grouped together with both communal and gender-specific spaces. Most activities, including cooking, took place outdoors, so interiors were reserved primarily for sleeping and storage. Painting. This painting of an eland is somewhere between 400 and 5,000 years old. A San artist created it at Game Pass, part of the Drakensberg escarpment in South Africa. Photo by Landmanson, 2004. Creative Commons CC by 4.0. Although some of Africa's earliest surviving art consist of paintings on rock outcrops in the Sahara Desert and in South Africa, traditional painting is otherwise uncommon and much other than coloring sculpture, ornamenting the skin, or decorating house walls. Frescoes from the 18th century decorate the ceiling and walls of the Church of Debre Birhan Selassie, Gondar, Ethiopia. Photo by Bernard Bagnon, 2012. Creative Commons CC BY-SA 3.0. There are two exceptions, both of long standing. One is a Christian painting tradition in Ethiopia, where church frescoes, panel paintings, illuminated manuscripts, and illuminated healing scrolls are part of a monastic tradition. Illuminations are tied to writing traditions. They are the painted illustrations that are part of handwritten documents or books. A new man created this pattern sheet as a reference for illuminations of the Quran. Ink on paper, mounted on cloth. Nigeria, before 1939. H 27.17. XW 36.22. Copyright the Trustees of the British Museum, F 1939, 7.34. Creative Commons CC BY North Carolina SA 4.0. The other is found throughout Islamic Africa, and consists of abstract geometric illuminations for the Quran and prayer books. This, too, is a specialty of religious scholars. Textiles. Male weavers with their warp stretched in front of their looms, Senegal, circa 1913. Public domain. In many parts of West Africa, men weave textiles in cotton, silk, rayon, or wool after women spin the threads. Weavers then stretch the threads that form the foundation for the weft to cross horizontal to the ground for a distance of many yards. The loom is set up with one or more heddles, a mechanism that pulls a particular set of threads out of the way. Weavers use their feet to manipulate them. During the weaving process, artists use shuttles, canoe-shaped wooden receptacles that hold the weft threads. They toss one or more of these depending on the amount of colors used back and forth through the channels the heddles produce. The resultant cloth consists of a long narrow strip between 1.5 and 6 inches. These strips are eventually cut to a standard length and sewn together side by side to form much wider cloths. Typically 10 strips form a sizable cloth. Referred to generally as narrow strip cloth or men's weaves, these textiles are worn by both men and women. The weavers are professionals and often set their looms up in a group within public areas. Vendors sell unsewn strips in the market to reassure buyers they are not purchasing second-hand cloth. Detail of a Yoruba men's weave, Nigeria, 1934. Knoxville Museum of Art. Creative Commons CC BY North Carolina 2.0. Narrow strip cloth can be a plain, one-color weave. Stripes have historically been popular, frequently made in a combination of a dyed white cotton and varying shades of indigo blue. Imported dyes and threads have permitted a broad spectrum of colors. In some areas, weavers produce extremely complex patterns, such as the Senegalese weavers of Manjac cloth or the kump produced by the Akan of Ghana and the Awe of Ghana and Togo. This detail from a 20th century Senegalese cloth known as Manjac displays highly complex patterns. Copyright the Trustees of the British Museum, F 1934, 307.193. Creative Commons CC BY North Carolina SA 4.0. Detail of an Awe men's weave from Eastern Ghana, circa 1955 to 60. Copyright the Trustees of the British Museum, F 1982, 33.1. Creative Commons CC BY North Carolina SA 4.0. Nigerian woman with loom, photographed between 1880 to 1905. Copyright the Trustees of the British Museum, F. A 50.24. Creative Commons CC BY North Carolina SA 4.0. Women rarely weave in West Africa. All the exceptions are within a contiguous area, suggesting a common origin with a local spread. Yoruba, Nupe, Hausa, Ebira, Northern Edo, and Western and Akwa women all weave. All but the Igbo region also include male weavers, but until recently female weaving has been an income supplement, rather than a full-time profession. Detail of a Nupe women's weave, Nigeria, late 20th century. The designs are weft floats that appear only on one side of the cloth. Women use a completely different type of loom than men, and generally weave individually at home. Their looms are set up vertically and produce a much wider cloth. 2 or 3 strips are enough to form a wrapper when sewn side by side. This Bushung man from the Cuba Kingdom in the Democratic Republic of Congo is producing a plain raffia cloth on a vertical loom. Photo, Casimir Zagorski, between 1929 to 37. Collecti.worldculture.nl Web link Creative Commons CC BY-SA 3.0. This young Cuba woman from the Democratic Republic of Congo holds a raffia plush cloth, the result of cooperation between both genders. Photo, Woody Collins, 2005. Creative Commons CC by North Carolina SA 2.0. In Central Africa, men weave and spun fibers of the raffia palm to make flexible, lightweight cloth. They use a vertical loom and often leave the material undecorated, although dyed fibers permit a plaid effect. In the past, raffia weaving was more widely practiced than it is today. Now it occurs in the Ibibio region of southeastern Nigeria, as well as among several groups in the Congo. In the Congo region, women often decorate plain raffia cloth via embroidery. They sew a series of tight loops onto the surface, later cutting them, which results in a plush surface like velvet. The effect can be elaborate, with dyed threads producing multicolored effects or variations in the surface depth. Detail of a stamped barcloth from the Bududa district of Uganda, before 1930. Copyright the Trustees of the British Museum, F 1930, 507.16. Creative Commons CC by North Carolina SA 4.0. Another textile variety and edge barcloth and edge was also formerly more widespread, though it still occurs in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, and Madagascar. Men remove the inner bark of wild fig trees, boil or steam it, then pound it until the fibers interlock, forming a felt that cannot unravel. Sometimes vigorous pounding produces holes, disguised through decorative patching. Detail of an Ukara cloth made by an Igbo man from Nigeria, late 20th c. The white elements were stitched tightly before dyeing in order to resist the indigo. Afterwards, the cut stitches reveal the pattern. Copyright the Trustees of the British Museum, F 1991, 24.9. Creative Commons, copyright the Trustees of the British Museum, F 1991, 24.9. Creative Commons CC by North Carolina SA 4.0. Yoruba tie-dyed cloth, Nigeria, 20th century. Woven cloth, whether hand-woven or imported, can be further decorated through a variety of techniques. These include tie-dye, stitched, or starch-resist, all of which shield part of the cloth from dye to produce a pattern. Cloths can also be stamped with designs, embroidery and sewing. With the exception of the all-over plush embroidery of raffia cloths, embroidery is traditionally a male art and a full-time profession. Widely practiced in West Africa, it primarily decorates male clothing. In East Africa, Swahili men's caps are usually embroidered, as is women's clothing in Ethiopia. Before the advent of the sewing machine, the sewing together of strips of cloth or the tailoring of shaped garments was also a strictly male profession. Detail of a large circular motif on a new men's robe. The stitching produces openwork eyelets. Nigeria, early 21st century. Bedwork. Special male artists construct the sacred beaded crowns of Yoruba kings. This 19th century example from the town of Ikere, Nigeria is made from tiny imported seed beads. 37.75 x 9.5. Brooklyn Museum, 70.109.1a-b. Caroline J. L. Pratt Fund, Frederick Lozer Fund, and the Carl H. D. Silver Fund. Creative Commons CC by 3.0. Many of Africa's earliest archaeological sites include beads, attesting to a long-standing value for beads as both jewelry components and clothing elements. Some of the earliest locally made beads were made of hand-drilled stone or shell, but glass beads were manufactured at least as early as the 11th-15th century in Ife, Nigeria. Beads were a major import even before direct trade, but European contact created an influx of beads in coral, glass, and later plastic. This beaded loincloth was made by a Ndebele female artist before 1989. The beads are sewn onto a leather backing. 25/9/16, x 24. Turpin Museum, 60391. Creative Commons CC by SA 3.0. Bedworkers vary in gender according to the area. In many parts of West Africa they are male, while in East and South Africa women produce both beaded jewelry and clothing. Leaferwork. Detail of a Mandingo sword sheath decoration, crafted by a male artist. Liberia, 20th C. Cleveland State University African Art Collection. The gender of leafer workers depends upon the ethnic group. In most parts of Africa, leafer workers are men. Their work often involves applying leather cutouts onto skin backgrounds, weaving leather strips into decorative panels, or creating leather cutouts that reveal another color below. Detail of a saddlebag crafted by a female Tuareg artist, probably from Mali or Niger. On long-term loan to the Cleveland State University African Art Collection. Among the Tuareg of Algeria, Mali, and Niger, however, leafer workers are women. They belong to the Inadan, the artisan's caste, and create decorated saddles, cushions, and bags. Body arts. Sectioning and thread wrapping is one of many ways to dress hair. West Africa, circa 1943. Album owned by John Atherton, Creative Commons CC BY-SA 2.0. In many parts of Africa, the body itself has been an art form, with human creativity altering hair and skin. Though this has taken place in many parts of the continent, it is particularly prominent among nomadic people. Hair can become very sculptural and can communicate not only fashionability but also ethnicity, marital status, particular professions, and achieved status. Normally hairdressers of the same gender, often friends or family members, create coiffures. Sculpture frequently depicts archaic hairstyles that are no longer worn. Plaited hairstyle by Liberian stylist on a Nigerian customer, 2014. Photo, Kathy Kurnow, Creative Commons CC by North Carolina 2.0. Some past hairstyles for brides or wealthy women underline their special status through crests that made it impossible for them to carry headloads, demonstrating that someone else in the household did the physical labor. Many styles are plaited against the head, creating complex graphic patterns, sometimes in combination with coiled hair or free-falling braids. Ethnic scarification, circa 1943. Northern Nigeria. From an album owned by John Atherton. Creative Commons CC BY-SA 2.0. Cosmetic scarification popular at the turn of the 20th century among Congo women, Democratic Republic of Congo. Public domain. Skin can be altered both permanently and temporarily. Scarification, also known as cicatrization, is a permanent method and falls into three general categories: ethnic markings, cosmetic scarification, and medical scarification. Ethnic markings were once widespread but have been outlawed in many regions. Specialists used to mark the face of children in a pattern shared by other members of the ethnic group. Herbs were applied either to raise the skin or sink it, as well as to prevent infection. Many artworks bear these facial marks. Cosmetic scarification, which has also died out in most regions, was mostly a female practice and generally took place during the teenage years, as its intent was to invite touch for courtship purposes. Styles changed over time and it too often appears on sculptures. Medical scarification usually occurred during childhood, and was more random than regular in appearance. It marked the insertion of medicines to cure conditions such as convulsions, and was generally performed on the neck and shoulder region. Fulani woman with cosmetic facial tattoos, Cameroon, 2011. Photo by Karsten ten Brink. Creative Commons CC by North Carolina, North Dakota 2.0. Another permanent alteration of the skin occurs via tattooing. Tattoos are not multicolored, but dark due to the insertion of vegetable carbon under the skin. With the exception of West Africa's Fulani and the Makand of East Africa and Ndej, where both genders can have facial tattooing and Ndej, these marks are usually borne only by women, as a cosmetic practice which has gone in and out of fashion. Tattoos usually consist of geometric patterns on the arms, chest, or back. Woman with a hennaed hand from the town of Sibi in Mali, 2017. Photo by Mark Fisher. Creative Commons CC BY-SA 2.0. Temporary skin decoration for women in some parts of Africa consists of the application of henna. This is derived from a cultivated plant that is dried and powdered, then applied as a paste and left to dry overnight. When washed off, the dark red or black stain remains for about a week. It can be used as a nail stain as well. Other plant extracts are also used to similar effect. Body paint allows frequent change and invention, and is made from natural pigments. Mercy woman from Ethiopia with painted facial designs, 2017. Photo by Rod Whittington. Creative Commons CC BY-SA 2.0. Chapter 1.3 Training and Patronage in Traditional Art. Apprenticeship. Artists' training affects the style of their work, as do the demands of their patrons. When consistency is valued over novelty, regional or chronological stamps are apparent, allowing recognition of an art type. Apprenticeship and the traditional method of African art education, as it was in most of the world for millennia, favors consistency. Whether or not traditional artists individually choose their vocation or live in a region where art is a family profession, most still undergo an apprenticeship. This training usually commences in childhood. Many apprentices relocate to live with their master. If art is a family occupation, another male relative, rather than their fathers, will usually train the boys. This is meant to provide a stricter, more formal environment for learning. An apprentice removing bark from a tree section, as his master carves. Malley, 1975. Single frame from David Attenborough's The Tribal Eye, Behind the Mask. Apprentices are expected to carefully watch the work of their master, but initially, their work is menial, sweeping up, bringing lunch, sharpening tools. As the years pass, the complexity of an apprentice's tasks increase, but following the master's methods and style remains critical. In a way, the master and his apprentices constitute a brand. Customers want works with the master's distinctive stamp. This is only possible if the advanced apprentices mimic his style so that their individuality remains submerged. Since apprenticeship lasts 10 years or more, this kind of patterned training becomes second nature, especially since apprentices are trained as copyists. That is, they are not asked to base the carving of a figure on an actual human being, but rather on an already sculpted piece. An apprentice usually graduates to an assistant before becoming a master himself. At that time, he is unlikely to abandon his training to strike out in a completely different direction, for that education is internalized and reflexive. He may, however, cultivate individual touches or create new themes or object types, but the degree of novelty he introduces is dependent on the market. Art is his livelihood, not a romantic creation. If his creations are rejected, he loses income. While this may favor a conservative approach to artistic change, it certainly does not prevent creativity within established parameters. These brasscasters belong to the Royal Brass Casting Guild of Nigeria's Benin Kingdom. They live in the same town ward as their ancestors, who had the same profession. While they still produce objects for the monarch and his chiefs, they have been free to sell to the general public for nearly a century. Copyright D. Anthony Mahone, 1994. As these Yoruba potters work in southwestern Nigeria, a little girl to the far right observes them. Photo, Herman Justus Braunholz, before 1946. Copyright the Trustees of the British Museum, F.B. 61.24. Creative Commons. Copyright the Trustees of the British Museum, F. 1991,24.9. Creative Commons CC by North Carolina SA 4.0. Most African artists throughout history were in essence part-time professionals, working in the dry season and farming during the rainy season. Some wealthy kingdoms, however, required so many objects that rulers established hereditary royal guilds to supply works to the monarch and his chiefs. Although these may persist, their customer base usually has expanded beyond royal courts alone, and not all family members may pursue the same vocation today. Female apprenticeship is usually more informally arranged than its male counterpart and is normally family-based, girls learning from their mothers or other women within a compound. Stylistic consistency. Many artists have signature ways of working, which are recognizable, if one examines them carefully. When they work with assistants and apprentices, some of those features and along with object types and typify the group, which is known as a workshop. It may be difficult to distinguish the hands of particular artists within a workshop, but that pursuit is part of connoisseurship. Although there will always be variations, consistent approaches towards works throughout a region and the way eyes are treated, body proportions, the way cloth designs are organized, the shapes of pots and put a stamp on that region. The products of artists in a large ethnic group may have discernible generally joint traits, reveal commonalities that pin down a region or a city, and further exemplify aspects of the workshop or individual hand. Recognizing these varying degrees of consistency requires exposure to many works, careful observation, and good memory skills. There will always be anomalies and outliers, but typical works provide handy baselines for recognition. Oniide of Abiakuta, Yoruba, Nigeria, before 1940. H 15.75. Yale University Art Gallery, 2006.51.219. Gift of Charles B. Benenson, B.A. 1933. Public domain, B. Yoruba, Ekiti region, possibly Ethanolai, early 20th century. H 15.75. Yale University Art Gallery, 2006.51.542. Gift of Charles B. Benenson, B.A. 1933, C. Agbondiaf Workshop, Abiakuta, Nigeria, first half 20th C. Cleveland State University African Art Collection, D. Yoruba, Nigeria, late 19th or early 20th century. Brooklyn Museum, 71.177.4A-B. Gift of Drive and Mrs. Abbott A. Lippman. Creative Commons by photo, Brooklyn Museum. Let's examine a type of sculpture Yoruba carvers from Nigeria have produced, for over a century, a presentation container depicting a kneeling woman holding a chicken that is actually a lidded bowl. 4 examples are shown above, all from the first half of the 20th century. 2 are from the same workshop but were made by different artists. C. 1c demonstrates lesser skills. If the coiffure is examined, the facial features on each differ, though they are in the same family, but the fowl's comb is identical, as is the treatment of its feathers, as a series of flat bands. Another work B initially seems to share strong stylistic similarities, although it comes from a different region, but the chicken feathers bear extensive engraving, as do the woman's tattoos, and the baby's proportions are vastly different. The 4th D has a bulging forehead and eyes none of the others bear, as well as significantly larger ears. She bears no child, and a large face is carved on the front of her chicken container. Yet the distinctive object type is the same, as are certain characteristics. That is, there is something discernibly Yoruba about the works, although there are stylistic differences even within the same workshop. Is this true of all areas? No. Some artists are idiosyncratic, others live in multi-ethnic areas and adopt stylistic treatments from outside groups, so much so that the overlapping factor is very strong. Factors for variance within an ethnic group can also be the result of politics and history. Nigeria's Igbo people lived in independent city-states until the advent of colonialism and were often at war with one another. Although some object types functioned identically, their styles displayed a spectrum of difference from fairly naturalistic to extremely abstract. The icon, the personal men's shrines below, all made by Igbo artists from a relatively small sector of southeastern Nigeria, vary significantly in their approach to these figures, and there are many more variations in existence. While icon from a single community or cluster may share stylistic traits, the radius of a similar set is fairly small. Igbo, Nigeria, early 20th C. H 36. Yale Art Gallery, 2006.51.545. Gift of Charles B. Benenson, B.A. 1933. Public domain, B. Igbo, Nigeria, first half 20th century. Cleveland State University Art Gallery, C. Igbo, Nigeria, C. 1900-1940. H 2911/16. Dallas Museum of Art, 1984.58. Gift of Carolyn C. and Dan C. Williams. Copyright Dallas Museum of Art / photo Jerry Reed. Patrons and commissions. Many pots were available for sale to passers-by at this early 20th century market in Mali. Public domain. In New York, an artist might create a painting, then enter a public exhibition to display and sell it, or establish a relationship with a gallery for the same result. Traditional African artists work very differently, as most artists have throughout history all over the world, and they produce most work only when a customer arranges for it and a price is agreed upon. That way they waste neither time nor materials in the hope of finding a customer. Most traditional sculpture was made by commission, which necessitated face-to-face preliminary conversation between artist and patron, with discussions about complexity and details worked out in advance. Only lesser items with constant sales were made in advance and stockpiled for guaranteed sales at a market: mortars, pottery, cloth, decorated calabashes. Because the makers of these objects are not necessarily the vendors, buyers are only indirect patrons, and the artists receive at most only second-hand feedback from vendors about their object's reception. Direct patrons typically are either individuals, representatives of a collective such as a masquerade society, or aristocrats and royals. Often they are members of the artist's own community, although an artist's reputation might result in a commission at some distance. One of a pair of ivory armlets made by an Edo artist at the Benin Kingdom Court, Nigeria, 16th century. Copyright the Trustees of the British Museum, F 1913,513.3. Creative Commons CC by North Carolina SA 4.0. Prices generally vary according to size, complexity, and material. When kingdoms were independent states, certain substances like brass, ivory, or specific bead types were sometimes limited to the ruler or nobility. Regulations of this kind are known as sumptuary laws. The elongated neck and legs of the kneeling female are unusual in Yoruba art. Presentation bowl carved by hollow of ice. Yoruba, Nigeria, C 1910 and C 1938. H 19.5. Courtesy Dallas Museum of Art, 2004.16.mct. The Eugene and Margaret McDermott Art Fund, Incorporated. Access to status materials, the cachet of employment by an influential monarch, and rewards that might include women, livestock, or property were attractive aspects of royal commissions. Some artists, like the Yoruba sculptor Olu of Ice circa 1873 circa 1938, worked primarily for royals throughout their lives, even without the existence of a royal guild system. Olu serves as an example of an artist who departed from many of the norms of his society's art. He was unusually adventurous in his approach to form, freeing some of his relief figures almost entirely from the background, creating tour de force carvings with elements such as a head trapped within an open-work enclosure. Although many aspects of his style were consistent with other Yoruba artists, he elongated many of his figures next to an extreme degree, left the mouths open and teeth showing on some. This detail of Olu's bowl shows the free-moving head locked within the ring of female figures, a signature feature of several works. Elevated figures, and created others much closer to natural head-to-body proportions than most Yoruba work. Lastly, some of his work includes curious cultural ambiguities, with the monarch's wife sometimes shown taller than he is, or the king and the British district officer depicted as equals. Olu's name is known, and like that of many traditional African artists working in the past. Although their identities may have been familiar in their community or region, those who took their works out of Africa in times past were interested in collecting that information. Some names have been recovered through research and others might still be researched and published, but many are lost forever. Chapter 1.4, Gender, Materials, Techniques in Contemporary Art. Chapter 1.5, Training and Patronage in Contemporary Art. Chapter 1.6, Elements of Style and Design.